just like the few stories from when I was in that university hellscape.
University hellscape. When did you graduate?
When?
Yeah.
2013.
From grad school?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I took a while. Like I didn't graduate from my undergrad till 2008. And yeah, then that was political science. And then after that, it was English. And yeah, graduated that like 2013.
Yeah, I graduated MFA in 2019. I would say 2008, dude. That's when I was graduating high school. I'm sure you love hearing that.
Oh, shit.
I graduated high school in 08. Yeah.
That's all right, yeah.
But yeah, that's fucking crazy. And then I had unorthodox college too. It took me like 5-6 years to get through all of college, like undergrad. So I didn't end up actually graduating from undergrad until like 2014. And then, I got into grad school right around 2015. Started at basically 2016, and then graduated 2019. Because you had a 3-year program, you said?
Yeah, the
same.
MFA and the MA combined. So yeah, it was 3 years.
Yeah. And when you told me that, I was like, yeah, cool. And dude, and then you're in Vegas. I was like, yeah, it's like, yeah, we should definitely get a drink at some point in person. Everybody I meet online, I guess it's so rare when they're actually in the actual, when they're like actually in the same city. I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
No, there's only a couple people I met like online that in the same city that are actually cool. Like, yeah, it's very, it's so rare. Yeah.
There is a lot of weirdos where like, whenever somebody does do like a reveal or something and like post photos of like a Twitter meetup, I'm always like, I don't know if I'd attend that based on how everybody's looking. I do not look like maybe it really is all just basement dwellers, and I'm like the one. We're just the few that aren't. I'm a teacher. I'm not.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored. I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner.
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
I mean, I got my MA like after I got my political science bachelor's. So like I kind of sort of like knew I wanted to like study literature like and teach and go in that direction.
It's a great life if you can get it, man. Like when I was in grad school and like everyone telling you that like you do believe it, like when you're sitting there like, yeah, this can be a job where you just basically talk and read books and write books all day, and then like you get into the world and there are no jobs anymore for that. So all the
exactly,
jobs.
yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
It's
that's
like,
exactly what I thought would happen. And like, yeah, I'm like, okay, yeah, no, there's no jobs in that direction at all. And, I mean, yeah, that was crazy. That was sort of like the most delusional because, yeah, I applied to a bunch of places, and I got accepted. Like, you know, I taught a class at Fullerton. I taught a class at Chaffee. I taught a class at Saddleback. I taught a class at IVC. I taught a class at South Coast. All of them, one class each, with that driving distance.
Right.
And the amount of time I had to spend on homework, like, it was just like no pay for no life.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of what destroyed me on that whole model. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just like work at a grocery store and I can make just as much, but I can have a regular schedule that won't destroy me.
Right.
Right.
And a lot of times when you have to do all those commutes, like I was commuting there a while there, yeah, back, even I said just in by Vegas here, going back and forth to Nevada State College down in like Henderson there, and like just the gas, like what I spent on gas to get there and back for like the 2 classes that I was teaching. You know, I was basically losing money to have this job. Like,
Yeah.
like I was
Yeah.
not making enough to justify the drive. I was like, well, I'm literally in negative money now if I'm driving to work.
Yeah, it's crazy, and that's just what I mean, that's
It's all there
yeah,
is now. It's that's what it is. When you get out of an MFA, there are 2 options you can take, which is to stop being going down that path, like to be like a kind of scholar and writer with a teaching gig,
Mhm.
or, you know, forever just do that kind of adjuncting. I guess the third option is try to become an internet personality like me and Eric here.
I mean,
That's like
I
the
guess
third option.
I mean, I don't. I just go down the option of like, okay, I'll teach elementary, like high school, whatever.
Right.
Like, and that's fine. I get that. Like, I don't know. I guess that's fine. But I mean, ideally, I'd like to teach college. But yeah, again, it's very difficult, and it's also because there are some new standards in hiring.
And there are no jobs. Like I always bring up this
Mhm.
statistic, especially when we do this kind of JerkShop stuff with the workshop stories.
Yeah, I've
MFAs,
heard this.
every year
Yeah.
we're graduating 3,000 a year, 3,000 fresh MFA grads a year, and there are less than 5 full-time positions available for a creative writing teacher. Like, and to even qualify for a creative writing position, you have to have at least 1 book, usually more than that, to get a job. You
Yeah.
only have to have 1 book if you're not white, or like,
Yeah.
what's your
No,
face?
yeah, it has to be published. Yeah, like I mean, and also it depends on who it's published by. Like, I mean, that's
Yeah,
a very real thing now, because I mean, I guess anyone could get their book published by like a private press now, which is
right,
honorable. I totally get that. I
for
understand
sure.
that. I read a lot of books that are published by private presses now that people just, put out on their own.
Right,
But that's not going to help you in an academic market.
right.
You're
It'll
going to
actually
need
work
some sort of
against
like,
you. Yeah,
yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
they will turn
You're
up
going
their
to need
nose.
like,
Yeah,
you're going to need like an adjacent, like Gray Wolf Press, something like that. Like some sort of like indie adjacent press
right.
to get you really noticed. And I think it's very hard without like, I mean, a lot of it's like academia will propel it up, but also social media will, but nothing that's really like interesting to talk about. I don't think. Like, there are only like a few presses that I know now that will like produce great content. Apocalypse Confidential, Expat Press, Broken River Books.
Say
Like,
you're
yeah,
you're naming what the literary world calls the alt lit scene, right? Doesn't that mean you're some
Yeah,
type of
exactly.
fascist, Eric? Isn't
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. No, totally fascist.
Yeah. This fascist book press that puts out small detective books, like.
Yeah, no. If you try to say something to the contrary, yeah, they'll call you fascist. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But
dude.
no, it's no. Those are where like a lot of the interesting stuff is being produced right now.
I think
Um,
that too. I think people are underestimating the energy, and I've heard other people say this on other, podcasts in that world, which is really the Red Scare and then people orbiting around Red Scare, right? Like
yeah,
all this stuff, the Rare Candy guys, you and I, they've had you on, they've had me on, they're
amazing.
doing great shit. Yeah, we love shout out to Rare
Yeah,
Candy.
they're great
Uh,
guys.
TPN and Jack, right? Like they're doing their thing, and then yeah,
Yeah,
we're
he's
all kind
awesome.
of orbiting around this kind of. There is a lot of energy here, and it is the most interesting thing that's happening right now. The most interesting stuff that's happening artistically, political commentary wise, even, and I think in terms of pushing the boundaries on some of these theories, is happening in this weird place on Twitter that you and I find ourselves hanging out in, and how we got to meet each other and got our paths cross.
Yeah, totally.
It's drawing
Yeah.
people. It's drawing more and more people in too. And I think maybe 5-10 years from now, I think that fascist label will disappear from some of those presses. But we'll see. I think because it's getting to a point where people can no longer ignore that all the most interesting, kind of coolest, most innovative stuff is happening in this weird little corner that everybody in academia is calling fascist, or whatever, far right, extremist kind of things. Really weird. I guess, is that how it always happens? Maybe, that there's like a group of people that just kind of start doing something different, and then it's rejected and smeared, and then all of a sudden it gets enveloped into what I guess that's what they call selling out or something, right? Like everybody will we get like enveloped into
Yeah,
like the mainstream
I mean,
eventually.
no, I mean, I think that's kind of how it works. I mean, I think, yeah, there's like a lot of people on our side of Twitter that think a certain way or are like very open-minded to certain ideas, and there's the other end that are like very just like, okay, well, if we see anything we disagree with, we're just going to cancel it. Yeah, like we're like really going to like try to get this person fired from their job because of it. Like, I mean, that's happened. And
That happened when I was at
so,
my
yeah.
MFA. Like, I watched it happen in real time, kind of thing.
Oh, really?
Professor got outed for being too white and male. Yeah.
Have you talked about this before on here?
I've talked about it. I'm not mentioning names, and I don't like to. And whenever I have guests too, and I always say, for listeners, if you have a story or something you want to share, because we can read it on the air here. It'll all be anonymous. Send that into heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. But yeah, I always try to keep it anonymous. But yeah, I don't know all the internal details, obviously, because the universities keep those pretty under lock and key. But I remember the teacher, who was very well respected. He was tenured in MFA industry. Like he was a teacher in a prestigious program, and he had many published books, and just this this cultural milieu started popping up around 2016-ish, post-Trump, and there was all of a sudden he started being called, mean or disrespectful or favoring only the white male perspective, like all these things, which aren't true of this guy at all, right? But like, that's what people were accusing him of. It's kind of the witch accusation. They were pointing to him and saying witch, and then he lost his job over, kind of really what they did to him was really kind of, they slowly, first they removed, because he was tenured, so they couldn't fire him right out. So at first he was removed from his duties as one of the MFA leaders on like he was removed from teaching a lot of the main MFA courses and stuff. And at first he kind of was like begrudgingly accepted that. And then they started to move to like deny him the next step in tenure, moving from like associate to assistant or whatever, assistant to associate to full kind of thing. They denied that. And then he appealed it, and then he eventually won that. But then they were giving him so much shit that he eventually just resigned from it. And I think that was by design. They wanted him to resign because they couldn't technically fire him, because of the tenure protections. But I mean, and I know that's my experience with it. And I know that it was happening all over the country. It's still happening all over the country and the world really right now. One of the things I'm interested in, I know you're not a big poetry guy. You said we were chatting, but Nick Flynn, I love Nick Flynn. He's I guess he does fiction and nonfiction too, so he does more prose stuff too. But I really love his poetry. I think he's a great fucking poet. And I haven't read his new book yet because it's not out yet, but I've seen some of the stuff that he's published that's coming out in that book. He got neutered by it, I think. I think they really snipped his balls. The Me Too thing really, really destroyed his life in a way.
What happened?
With him, I'm not sure of all the details, but from what I understand, mostly was, he was a big hotshot writer and poet, right? And during the Me Too fervor, he got Me Too'd for sleeping with grad students. not raping or anything like that, right? But consensual sex, but still they were, it was all came all about not rape, but about the power dynamic, right?
Yeah, it was one of those.
Eventually, yeah. And the big scandal with that was that he was married, right?
Okay.
And so I guess his wife left him, and I think he's still teaching at Houston, but I think he got very much like almost lost a couple contracts on book deals, and then of course he was so big, I'm sure he had engagements canceled, like talks and stuff that he was probably on the book for, probably already got the check for, and then I had to cancel on him because of that. And just this new stuff, it reads a little bit like he was cowed. Like he used to be so bold and so fuck you in all of his poetry, especially. And then it kind of, I mean, I don't know yet because the book isn't out yet, but just what I've read of it so far, I'm a little disappointed. It seems like he's been neutered. And that, I think, was the goal. They wanted this hotshot poet, American poet, to be neutered in some way,
Yeah. I mean,
it's happening everywhere. Yeah,
like,
hundreds of stories.
A lot of it, like, I mean, if you want to talk about like masculinity or something that wants to be neutered, like it's the whole Andrew Tate thing where it's sort of like this
first person to bring up Tate on my pod. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a guy who just Tate stuff, but like it's sort of like this psyop to bring back like. Everyone knows he's ridiculous,
right? And so at this point too, he's been caught. You're
gonna like entirely discredit any point that he makes. So like the basic point he makes, which is really kind of good, which is that like kind of a sort of like anti-modern feminist view.
Right.
Which is like, maybe men should be a little bit more dominant, right, in every aspect.
Right.
So to kind of counteract the negative effects of like a lot of traditional feminism, I don't know. I don't really know enough about that, but like, from how I perceive it, like it's just like I don't know. It seems like it's sort of the same thing.
Yeah, especially Tate's interesting because, and like you said, I'm not like a fan of his or anything. Like I'm watching his videos or whatever, like paying for his courses. But it's obvious now at this point too. Ever since he went on like Your Mom's House like 2 years ago or whatever, like that Tom Segura's podcast or whatever, he basically admitted that it's like mostly an act. Like he's leaning into it kind of thing where it is like kind of this internet act that he's, I'm sure he believes a lot of it, but like he is almost playing a character in some regards, but
he hopes that like people just pay attention to like the clips that he posts and doesn't actually like really delve into some of his like deep takes.
Right. He's not
like,
writing any
subscribe
books.
And they'll like kind of exactly. Like they'll fade out. Like they'll subscribe, they'll fade out, and no one will care anymore. Yeah. That's kind of how I feel about how a lot of his stuff is going.
But yeah, man, listeners, I know we've been talking a little bit, but this is Heavy Board Presents JerkShop. And I'm joined again by Erik at Organized Meat on Twitter there. And we're going to go, this is the part on Heavy Board where we go into all things workshop stories, writing workshops, publishing industry, all this kind of stuff. If you have something you want to share with us, please send that into heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We will read it on the air, anonymously, of course. We don't want to blow up anybody's spot, especially if you're currently still attending an MFA program. But it's always cool to go in there and talk about it. And I always say, like, it's going to be negative, right? Like, we're going to be bitching and we're going to be negative, but I always try to keep a little bit of positivity in it, too. So we're going to get into stuff here. And Erik's joining us. And Erik, I just want to, just for listeners and stuff, give me a little bit of your workshop background, your MFA background. You don't have to dox yourself. You want to give program names or anything, but just a little bit of your experience in it and, just kind of a refresher for the listeners here.
Okay, so my whole academic history is I graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science in 2007. And after that, I graduated with a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and a Master of Arts in English Literature in 2013, I believe. And that's from Chapman University, Southern California. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't care if I ask myself. Whatever. But yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
Those are my credentials. But I've been reading all my life, paying attention to politics all my life. Like, that's kind of it.
Right. And and listeners know this, a lot of people turning into this know this, when you're going to those grad programs, and you're a college educated, American, basically, you're interested in those things, right? So you're keeping up with the literature, you're keeping up with some of the political discourse, even before everything kind of hit the fan in 2015-ish, 2016-ish with political fodder. But yeah, I mean, that's just what it is. So Erik's been there, he's done that, he's been in and out of workshops for a while, and we're going to get into it here today, listeners. Yeah. And what I usually start this off with, and the whole reason I ever started this segment is because I had a couple listeners write in and talk about, it was kind of negative emails where they were talking about workshop culture, this phrase, workshop culture, academic spaces and things like that. And I always like to ask my guests when they come on here for this, what is the first thing you think of when you think of workshop culture?
I can almost imagine like the person that's like writing this. Okay, yeah. Workshop culture is pretty much they will it's hypercritical. So whatever story you come in with, whatever, whether it's a little avant-garde, a little realistic, whatever it is you have, they will come on and try to be they will throw some theory at it. Marxist theory.
Oh, yeah.
Gender theory.
Feminist.
Racial theory.
Oh, yeah.
They'll throw all the theories at it. And your story has to survive. So that's exactly what I think.
I like how you frame it as survival.
Yeah, I mean, I know it sort of sounds more innocent than that, but having gone through this stuff, yeah, it is definitely survival. You really do have to survive some of this stuff. And a lot of it really is not so antagonistic because you do talk to these people outside of class, but yeah, there is some sort of you do have to sort of calm yourself, okay,
and
I'm not gonna take it seriously, you just have to really cool yourself off.
And there is kind of an inherent tension too, like you were saying, that there even though you're friends with these people in the social circle and stuff, and you're hanging out all the time, especially in MFAs, there is kind of an inherently kind of tension to a workshop circle,
Mm-hmm.
And I am fascinated by that idea of is it just jealousy? Is it just the way it's set up, everybody having to come there and you do have to, you have to have critical thoughts. I talked about this on one of the other episodes with a guest where it is inherently kind of, it's meant to be critical, right? It's not meant to praise anything. So when you're putting something in that workshop, nobody is going to say, oh, it's great. It's great. You shouldn't change anything. The structure is that they're going to have a lot to say about what you should change, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's how it should be, really.
Yeah.
And it was most of the time. So, I mean, there was there was this story that was written by a girl she was Mexican.
Here we go.
And, and it was about how she saw her grandmother chop off the head of a chicken and like defeather it and cook it and make it part of their meal. And I don't know, there was something like very Mexican about it. Like from my perspective, not that great of a story. It was okay, but apparently there was one person who was like, okay, don't you think like, because okay, so this story took place like in the United States. Like they were like in Los Angeles, and this was like an immigrant family living in the United States, and they had like some sort of chicken. But they were Mexican immigrants, I guess, and so was this girl that I'm talking about who wrote it. And like the person was like, well, it doesn't like chopping the head off of a chicken and like gutting it and all the stuff that doesn't make you seem like very like disgusting and like it doesn't make you appear in a good eye, like or for in front of these people.
Aren't you a colonizer by doing?
Yeah, exactly. And it was like the chick was like, hell no, what are you talking? Are you saying my people are fucking like trash? Like what the fuck are you talking about? And this was it got into a huge argument. It was so bad.
And this was in the workshop, right? Like it became
yeah. And like they were getting an argument, and like someone had to go outside, and then we went into another thing because of course these people were very liberal and they understand how to contain this. But yeah,
we had to have therapy sessions about it. And
yeah, that was like one of the worst like workshop things that happened. Like, oh man. Yeah, no, it was like because it's like who was like more racist. It was like a who was more racist contest. Yeah, it was like this is where liberalism and like that shit eats itself. So yeah,
the purity spiral. Yeah, and it is crazy. And I know everybody that has sat in a workshop post 2010 has had a blow up like this happen in their workshop. I've had it happen several times, and I'm not even talking like undergrad or community level workshops. Like I'm sure that happens there too. I'm talking like MFA. Like these are supposed to be prestigious, serious workshops, like and it always devolved into this like this kind of like this kind of a very politically framed arguments over who is untouched by the impure characterizations of fictional character, like kind of like who is more pure in this regard. And I think that's it. I haven't gotten into super specifics on it yet. We've only done a couple episodes, as regular listeners will know to this podcast, but it's like there is this sense that's become the main focus of almost all literary endeavors now. It does distract from actually making the best work possible. Whereas, like you said, most people go into a room in a workshop, they don't care what you actually wrote, like the content of it. You're telling an immigrant story, great. Is the story any good? Is usually what people are going to be critiquing it on, right? But that's changed a little bit. So it's not so much how good the story or the poem is in a workshop. It's how well does it adhere to this political ideology where we all have to test each other constantly with like a racism meter and like these little tiny gauges that everyone apparently just has in their head that knows, where they just like, a little dial or something where everybody's like grading each other according, well, how much racism was in this one? I don't know. Cutting the head off a chicken. I don't know. Isn't that racist to assume that Hispanic people living in the Southwest of America cut off heads of chickens that they have in their backyard. I mean, like what? Like it does become this kind of, all right, how did we get here? You know, like it's these kind of blow ups, like, and it's really ramped up. So you had, and this was, you were talking, this was 2012 ish, right? Like this is happening, like 2013 ish,
Yeah. Yeah. This is
before the
definitely,
blow up, pre-Trump.
Obama. Yeah. Yeah. Mid-Obama era. Yeah.
It is crazy. Like now I categorize the world now just the way I think about it as there is pre-Donald Trump and there is post-Donald Trump, because
Yeah.
and I'm not even a Trump guy. Like I'm not, like, and I know like people on like our side of circles would, whatever, they want to shame me for that, whatever, but like I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's like that's a problem. The problem that this guy, like whoever the fuck, like when the fuck has a president being elected changed how we view literature and scholarship and how we set up fucking workshops? Like that's an issue, man. That's a huge fucking issue, and it's happening at the most prestigious programs in the world right now. And I am getting real sick of that, you know, like being the only metric that's used to judge a work of art. And I know I'm not the only one, you know, especially in our circles, there's plenty of people that openly say this, right? But in the larger literary world, we're the minority in terms of thinking this way, that like this is misguided. It's clouding out the actual purpose that we're here for. We're trying to create good contributions to American literature, essentially, you know?
Yeah.
And like, I just get so frustrated by that. And the fact that people just take it as a given, like, oh, it's the way you're supposed to think about it. I'm like, no, it's fucking not. It's not. Like, this is made up because Donald Trump got elected. Like, but I guess what you're saying is like, and I know people that have looked into this have proved it, that, yeah, you know, it started way before Donald Trump got elected. It was kind of brewing in academia for a couple of decades before it really took off with social media. And
Yeah. No, it was kind of always there. And I mean, I think like the fact that Donald Trump arrived because of it.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, JerkShop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
I mean, that just reflects like, you know, what was happening in society.
Right,
so,
yeah.
I mean, because there were like some people that I did go to school with who did agree with me, but they were like, you know, kind of like down low. They weren't going to say anything like too publicly.
Right.
Like there was that like 2-year period time where people were afraid to like really say what they wanted to say, or else.
And for good reason. Yeah. Like, it wasn't irrational to be afraid
like,
to say
even,
what you,
like,
yeah.
Yeah. Like not even no one famous, just anyone.
And even the famous people. Yeah.
Yeah. And there could be some like repercussion because of that.
There would have been, like, that's the thing is like, that time right after it, like 26, and that was me starting. And I know this is weird for some listeners that aren't on Twitter, but whenever I have a guest from my circle of Twitters on, it's like, you know, they always refer to Twitter red pilling, right? Like, do you take the red pills? And I know that's a meme, and it's a much broader meaning than just kind of turning away from liberal politics for the first time. But it's, for me, 2016 was when I was starting. I was basically my first year of grad school. And, you know, in that November, Donald Trump gets elected. And then I just remember having, like, we had a class. And I remember, like, the day after the election, we had, like, a class, you know, of all the people in the cohort. It's a required class we all had to take or whatever. And we all showed up. And I remember that, like, we had, like, the teacher had, like, this therapy session, basically. Like, does anyone need a moment? Like, does anyone need to not have class today, kind of thing. And I just remember that was one of my first moments. I remember specifically being like, something's different about this. like since when did, a president getting elected, like make us all have to change the way we do courses the next day? Like what are we doing here? Like, we're letting it control our lives. Like, we're letting that whoever happens to be president on any given day control the output of literature. Like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, I mean, I'm constantly frustrated. And I mean, I'm not trying to get up with a definitive answer, but I mean, everybody feels this. Everybody in this field feels it. If you've been even just adjacent to this field in any way, you know exactly what's happening, and you're not allowed to say it. You're not allowed to say it honestly. Like, we can't have honest conversations about books, about honest, truthful interpretations, just how somebody feels about it, without this cloud of specifically liberal, or I like to say even more specific, DNC politics being just forced over it. Like, I wonder where that comes from. Yeah. Sorry.
It's a lot of the DNC politics trying to like pretend like they're like they're woke, like they're the people who like want to protect free speech, but they're not. And I mean, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot to worry about as far as protections of free speech nowadays. So,
and you talked about writers, like even like famous big names. Like, I've been kind of disgusted at the lack of people saying something. There's a few that do. There's a few that will step outside and say, "Hey, like, I don't agree with this," kind of thing. And they're getting a lot of shit for it. I mean, Lionel Shriver, do you follow her at all, and her kind of red pilling that she's been going on in this last 6 years that we've all lived through?
Lionel Shriver, the name sounds familiar.
We need to talk about Kevin.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do know that. I know the movie, and I know there was a book about that.
Yeah, not the most famous writer ever, but she's a big name in the world, right? And publishes her books. She's been around for 20, 30 years, and she's writing for The Spectator now, center right magazine, listeners that don't know. And she is just writing about how this is all nonsense, and she's one of the few that is very vocal about how, no, you don't get to tell me what I get to write. Like, you don't get to tell me what words are off limits, like, kind of thing. And she keeps making this point that I think people are not being honest about, where she says, 5 years ago, nothing I'm saying would have been a controversy. Like, nothing I'm saying would have gotten me pegged as some evil right-wing person. She's like, because I'm not, kind of thing. And she's like, but all of a sudden now it is, and I'm the bad guy for saying that this is wrong, and I do view it as cowardly when I see big names that could put this to bed. They could end it if enough of them stood up and said, enough of this. It could be over. We could stop worrying about it, but they're not doing it. And it's either because they're, true believers, or like you said, they're terrified, and not irrationally terrified either, because you will be disinvited. You will be removed from committees. You will be removed from the prize committees that you're on with your prestige and all that. Like, you will be disinvited from your speaking engagements that were going to give you a paycheck. Like, I don't know how anybody can deny it at this point.
Like, I totally sympathize with them. Like, I mean, I really do sympathize with, like, these people that, could tell the truth, but I don't know. I'm getting paid a lot by these people to keep quiet. So, I mean, I really do sympathize, but that's just, I honestly think that's part of just, like, human tragedy. Like, that's it. That's kind of what happens.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. Right. It's we're all going to go for what's most profitable, what makes us the most pleasure.
And even a few, like, you see, like, when the Raw Doll stuff happened, and then the Agatha Christie stuff, and then of
Oh,
course
yeah.
the Ian Fleming stuff. I saw a few that you were using their prestige and their name and their power to buck up against it a little bit. Solomon Rushdie was one I noticed, who was right away saying, "This is terrible, don't do it. Puffin should be ashamed of themselves for censoring these old books." Joyce Carol Oates was a little wishy-washy on it. She said the Roald Dahl stuff was terrible, but then she kind of defended the Agatha Christie stuff. And Joyce Carol Oates is clearly super online and addicted to social media, but like so she's probably not thinking clearly. But I'm like, where are these people? Bret Easton Ellis is very vocal about this, but of course, people have always kind of rejected him for his outspokenness, so he can't make a big dent. But it is like, I am like, what? Because it does affect the field. Like they're okay now, right? But like 5 years from now, if nobody puts a damper on this, they're coming for Solomon Rushdie. They're coming for Joyce Carol Oates. They're coming for, they're going to come for you, kind of thing.
Oh, they're so gonna come for Joyce Carol Oates.
Right? Yeah. Especially.
I mean, I can't wait. Like, I mean, I'm someone who, like, I read, I don't know, 60, 70 Joyce Carol Oates books. Like, I'm a huge fan. Like, huge fan.
Yeah, she's good.
Of
Yeah.
hers. I mean, she is amazing, and there's a time where I just, like, ran through her books, like, a good year and a half, where I just, like, really ran through everything she did. But I just can't see her being, like, effective as, like you would see her as being, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. Like, I just don't think she, like, how could you cancel Joyce Carol Oates?
Right.
Like, really? Like, how could you cancel her? I mean, if you've read her works, like, it's gone, like, over, decades. I just don't know how someone could come with, like, someone who's only had works through, like, a couple, few years and cancel Joyce Carol Oates. I don't know, and that's a lot of what they're trying to do right now.
Yeah. I wonder I'm calling it now. I think there's going to be like what we would call a red pill moment for a lot of writers. If nothing happens, or at least there's no vocal movement against it, there's some, but not a big enough one to make a dent. But I could see that being a thing, especially after she dies, right? And I could see a lot of people taking that angle of, we need to cancel her now, or pretend her books were these horrible books or something. She wrote that article, right? What was that? 8 months ago now, about the publishing industry and how we're trying to kind of very gently say that she thought something that was going on that she kept seeing and was alarming to her, right? Which is, again, this kind of racial hierarchy that I always kind of bring up, that didn't used to exist but exists now. In terms of publishing.
Enough. Yeah.
And she's, and people were pillaring her for it. They were pretending she was some type of crazy racist, which no, she isn't. Any type of thing where people are willfully being ignorant about what she's saying to smear her. And I'm just like, you think that's not going to come for you, Joyce? Like, that's coming. One more article like that. Just wait. Like, like kind of. Mm-hmm. And she's just being honest. She's just, she seems like just a nice little old lady, a little quirky, whatever, like kind of wrote this huge body of work that she's had, this huge impact on American literature and culture. And people are still pretending that she's some crazy, doesn't know what she's talking about. Like, I'm like, okay, how long is that going to work? Apparently it's going to work for a long time.
Yeah, that's insane. Like, people who talk like that are insane. Joyce Carol Oates knows exactly what she's talking about. I mean, it doesn't matter if you disagree with her or not. Like,
everybody knows it. Yeah,
she's talking about. Like,
if you've been in the industry,
just listen to her. Yeah, that's all I say. Listen to her. Like, listen to Joyce Carol Oates. Listen to her perspective. Like, her perspective on feminism is not at all what like the newer perspective is. So
Right.
like, I understand how some people don't understand her, but really they should listen to her.
And she came up in that time. She's
Yeah.
older. She came up, like, everybody wants to talk about how, oh, there's a patriarchy, blah, blah. Like, Joyce Carol Oates lived the fucking patriarchy, okay? Like, when
Oh
she was
yeah.
starting out, people were literally saying to her face, you are a woman and you cannot write. Like, that's what literally people were saying to her face. Like, has
Yeah.
any fucking woman in the last 40 years, like, trying to be a writer, had that happen to them? I doubt it. I bet not one of them in the last 40 years has had that happen to them. But when she was starting out, I bet it happened almost every time she tried to publish something, especially some of her more raunchy or sexual stuff, you know? And I just, so she, of course, is like, I lived through this, man. Like, I lived through it. I had people telling me to my face that because I was a woman, I couldn't do this, or I couldn't say this, or I couldn't write this. Like, and it's just these people, it's stolen valor to say that she's wrong or something. It's like, no, she lived through it, man. Like, when she was
Yeah.
born, there was one way of living. And then, like, some point in her life, it changed, right? And we had the kind of cultural revolution of the 60s and the kind of feminist revolution and all that we've living in that world since.
Yeah. No, 100%. And yeah, that's why I believe like she's just like one of the greats. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's awesome.
One other thing I wanted to mention with the writing workshops.
Oh, hell yeah. Here we go.
Okay, so I don't know if you had the same thing with yours, but like the Bukowski, like wannabes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like the people that just wanted to be like Charles Bukowski, and that's it. And that was like the end of their like. I swear to God, there were like 3 or 4 in my program. I don't know if you had any experience with those type of guys. But...
Oh, yeah. I was one of them. Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. Nice.
Yeah. When I was younger, I was definitely like one of those guys. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's always those. And there's like, and you mean like the kind of, they don't just want to copy his style, they want to live his lifestyle, right? Like,
it was like, okay, I know, like, okay, you're writing poems and stuff about, like, fucking hookers and,
right.
like, you know, and, like, getting drunk or whatever, like, but I know, like, you have never done, like, either of those. Or maybe 1.5. I don't know. Like, you seem sort of like a geek that just reads books. And that's, like, what your personality is based off of, is books that personify this image that you will not do. And that was, like, a large part of, like, the people that were in some of my program.
And they were, was it any like incidents or something because of that? Or was it just like they were just like douches that nobody liked? Or
No, they were just douches that, like, you know, it was whatever. Like, you know,
right.
They weren't that bad, but they were, you know, yeah. No one really cared, but it was just like, yeah, they were that type in the program.
I noticed that, not necessarily Bukowski, but specifically, I was maybe the biggest Bukowski fan out of my cohort for most people. But then I did notice there were it was a personality type that MFAs attract a lot of that, especially art scenes attract a lot of people like this. But it was like, there was a certain type of writer or aspiring writer at the MFA level that was like, wanted to be an alcoholic or thought that they had to be an alcoholic to be a writer, you know, like of some kind. And that can get pretty annoying pretty quick, especially if they're sloppy drunks. It just, you know, and then everything starts to become about the same thing, and just kind of, look at how much I drink. That's, you know, I'm Hemingway basically because I drink this much. Like, and I'm like, yeah, that's not how it works, bro. But, you know, like there is this kind of romanticizing level to it too, where like it's not just people that are trying to do work. There's people that just want to live the lifestyle or pretend, talk about being a writer, talk about being a poet, imagine themselves as the the reincarnation of Bukowski or something. Or
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I mean, I think that's like what a lot of people that I was going to school with were kind of imagining themselves, was like the Bukowski type.
And it's interesting too, because I went, I guess it was probably like 4 or 5 years after you graduated, I was starting my MFA, and there's like, it is crazy how much that changes where that type, specifically because it's mostly men that are attracted to that Bukowski style, more or less.
Yeah.
I've met a few women that do too, but like mostly men. And I think this kind of the anti-masculinity stuff that's happening, it's tied up in all this DNC stuff that's used to grade everything, but it is like there's been a rejection of that more recently, I would say, in terms of like if you're somebody who wants to do the Bukowski thing, well, a lot of MFAs will put you on the reject stacked, kind of as you're applying, just because they view you as some type of toxic presence or yeah.
And I mean, I love like I do like that Bukowski like stack. Like, I mean, I do appreciate a lot of that. So like, there were some people in my MFA program that like did do that, and it was like, well, it at least it was authentic. I don't know how authentic, just writing about you getting drunk and sleeping with a woman or whatever is. Like, I really don't know how authentic that is, but okay, like, that's your thing, go ahead. But there was like something when you had to like be held to it in a writing session, and I think you could kind of tell sometimes who were authentic about it and who weren't. I don't know. I think there's something you could see about someone who is like, oh, this guy got a lot of pussy and he's writing about a lot of pussy. Like you could see him, but like the other guy who's like, oh, I'm like, writing about like, sex here, like sex with every woman, but like, oh, okay, dude, you're like, nah, I'm not getting it. Right. Like,
one thing I'll say,
sort of
the amount of adult virgins that I met when I was in my MFA was very, very eye-opening to me. Like, I didn't think that existed beyond the Steve Carell comedy. Like, I didn't think that was a thing. But, like, apparently that's a thing, particularly in these MFA programs. Now, I was shocked. I knew three. That's a lot, right? Like, and I mean, I was 26, and like, I didn't know anybody in my personal life who was a fucking adult virgin at the age of 26, And that was just, I'm like, wait a minute, you're trying to be a writer and you've never had sex? I know, like, how does that work? How does that?
There were some, like, it was some of those, but like, I couldn't ask them.
Right.
If they ever had sex. Like, like it was so weird. So, yeah, I don't know.
A friend of mine, I remember.
Yeah, it was very odd with that entire thing. But, so with the workshop stories, every guy wanted to be Bukowski.
I had a friend of mine. She was a guest on this podcast, and we were in MFA together. I remember we were sitting in, one of those fucking rooms that they give you when you're in that, and then you're kind of just doing work or whatever. Like, while we were sitting there, I had to teach classes in an hour or something. This is like the room you can hang out in between. And my one friend, she was doing the workshop work for that week or whatever, like reading the other cohorts members' story. Giving the feedback and stuff, kind of going over it because she had time to kill. And I remember she just kind of scoffed at one point, and I looked up from my work, and she she turned to me from across the table, and she's like, ugh. I hate it when people write about sex who have never had sex, you know, like, and then just started writing something on like the person's story. And I was just like, oh yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about in that room.
Yeah.
And it was like she showed me the scene and I was like, yeah, like this person's never had sex. Like, this person has never, that's not how it works, bro.
No, there was a lot of that in some of the workshops. Yeah, just like a lot of people who clearly weren't like being real about any of the stories that they were involved in.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, and we can be a little forgiving, sure, right? Like, yeah, because they're students of it, right? So they're trying things, whatever. But yeah, it is kind of funny. Speaking of this
Yeah.
workshop, like what I like to ask writers when they come on here, like, how does the workshop fit in to not just the MFA, but I think the larger creative writing world? Because I haven't talked about it much on this podcast, but I think there is this level where workshops are kind of a beginning level thing with
Yeah.
creative writing, and then you can eventually evolve past them, kind of thing. So I just like always to get writers' takes on things like that. Where do you think it fits? Or
I mean, I think workshops are very helpful as far as like getting some people that like some of their ideas, but I believe it really has to be very selective. So as far as like like a college writing workshop or something like that, it could be good on a level if you want to sell it to like maybe more of like a mainstream market or something like that. You want to like get the general people's opinion, but I really just think that like if you want to publish something, if you want to write something, you should just go to your friends
right?
and like ask them like what did they think, like, and then publish it independently. I honestly now I don't think that there's like any big like you're not going to become like the next what is it, Twilight or
Right. Yeah.
whatever, right? Like that's not going to happen. Like you publish independently and you market yourself. That's how it happens. So I mean, I think anyone going through a creative writing program in college today like really has to learn about marketing. Like
Yeah.
I don't think that writing is the number one thing, honestly. Like if you're good enough to get in the program as far as writing, you're probably good enough to make a story. How good are you at marketing that story
Right.
and making that something that people want to read?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's good. I mean,
Right.
but I on here on this side of Twitter, like there's a lot of people who are great authors and they have books that I want to read, and
And
they seem,
successful. Yeah.
they seem to do well. They have like a lot of people who want to read it. So I mean, that's my whole thing.
Yeah, I like the workshops, and that's why I think it is interesting, especially when you have people that are, you know, you're when you're right out of the MFA, you still kind of believe that that's the only option, and it kind of teaches
Yeah.
you that when you're there. But then, as you know, you spend a couple years outside of that world, especially because you can't get a job usually now out of it, and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, like that's one method that used to be the only way. It isn't the only way anymore, you know, kind of thing. It's because even then, like it's not even necessarily about the writing now, and this is why I always bring up that point of regular listeners will know this, like the DNC rubric that everybody is pretending isn't real. It's not about just the writing anymore. You know, like it's not about when you're applying to Iowa, they're not just picking the things that they think are the best. They're picking them
Oh, yeah.
according to this rubric, according to a racial hierarchy, according to a diversity quotas, according to I would say straight up, I don't want to say the word hatred, but I would say straight up dismissiveness at male perspectives, usually. It's not about that. Like, even if they like your story, like, well, then the very next question they're going to ask before they admit you into the school is, what color are you? What sex are you? That's what they're going to ask. And then if they're going to determine how to let you in based on that and not the story, because I'm sure Iowa, sure, they get to have their pick. Everybody that gets in is good. Sure. You know, I'm willing to admit that, but it's just like, now they're adding this like layer of inherently political frameworks on top of it. So they're not even being good stewards of the craft anymore. They're being good stewards for a political party. It just drives me nuts, man. God, I'm sorry to keep bringing it up.
Someone like, because Iowa, like that was like Kurt Vonnegut's like workshop, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I know I saw your clips about Kurt Vonnegut and how influential he was. Like, same to me. He's the guy.
That's how we started talking, I think, right? You and we started talking on Twitter over that. Yeah.
Maybe like that, and something like this, probably. Yeah. Would not doubt that. Yeah. Like some Kurt Vonnegut shit. He is my favorite writer. Always has been. And he's always has been, because like politically, like he's just always been presented as like he's funny and he's anti-war. Right. That's always me, you know.
Right. Like, and he would always stress kind of not so much political party, but he would always stress the humanist angle that he at least felt himself coming from.
He was, it wasn't like, I mean, because he wasn't exactly like entirely anti-war. I guess he felt like probably like World War II was good, but, you know, he also questioned whether it was good at the same time. And that's what I always appreciate about him. Like, he could appreciate like both aspects, and like that's just, you can't get that nowadays. You just can't get that.
Yeah. And I think even Vonnegut, like he would and it's because this framework for politics didn't exist when he was publishing. Like you weren't put into categories as a writer as this person's a Republican writer or this person's a Democrat writer. Like, you weren't put into these categories because nobody viewed writing that way. And even though I would say, if I had to guess, I would say Vonnegut would probably be more liberal, center left, if I would guess. And I mean, you were a big fan. Yeah, he definitely.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
His opinions and stuff. Like, I would read all that shit, like hungry as fuck when I was discovering him. And yeah, definitely center left. But, that's fine. But it was just like, nobody was talking about that. And even then, I did this on the Vonnegut episode where I was thinking about Slaughterhouse-Five and how it's anti-war. But then there's all these sections when he's talking to the aliens and stuff about war's inevitable. You know, like, like, what do you think, you're going to stop people from fighting? Like, kind of thing. Like, what, you're living in fantasy land if you think you're going to stop wars from happening. You know, like, kind of a realism to it. Yeah. Sorry.
That's what's so sad about Vonnegut, is like, because he realizes war is inevitable and he hates it.
Right.
He hates it so much, and he knows that it's inevitable. And I mean, that's one of those things. And I think, going back to Robinson Crusoe.
Oh
yeah. He knows that like conquering these nations is inevitable.
Right.
And he doesn't mean to be malicious, but he understands that like that's what's right.
That innate thing in us that want to conquer, like that kind of innate, human
innate thing.
Yeah,
we have to do what's right. If we see something wrong, we got to do what's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true too, man. It's. Yeah. I'm glad Vonnegut got brought into this. I'm always, you can't have the podcast where I talk about him all the time, but I'm like, yeah, everybody, all guests, just bring it up when you're on with me. Yeah.
He made me get into writing too. Exactly, so when you and I think it was Matt Wall, when I saw those clips of you and him talking about Vonnegut, I was like, oh man, Like, yeah.
Especially
Breakfast of
for
Champions,
men.
my favorite novel. Yeah, like it made me laugh. Like I laughed out loud so much in class, I got reprimanded. Had to stand outside. That novel, like, just
There's nothing else like
it's
it.
the best.
Yeah.
It's the best. Nothing
Nobody's
like
come
it, and
close. Yeah.
nothing. Yeah.
People want to say
So
Confederacy of Dunces. No, it is not as funny as this. Like
no,
Vonnegut.
yeah, yeah, no. Even and Confederacy of Dunsons is hilarious, but not not even on the level of Breakfast of Champions. Yeah,
And he's like, and I think it's very masculine. It's very, men love Kurt Vonnegut, and they love him in a way that I don't even know if women could. Like, kind of like, and I know that sounds sexist. I don't mean it in a sexist way. I'm saying that like he hits something that just men respond to. Like he hits that thing that just. It's hard for me to even articulate it. Like I'm trying to think of how to say it. Like it's. Hey, would you believe there's still an extra hour of conversation left? Well, there is. And if you want to hear the full uncensored episode, you need to subscribe at patreon.com/heavyboard, where you will receive full uncensored episodes like this without any interruptions, ads, or anything else. And that's for subscribers only at patreon.com/heavyboard. So, what are you waiting for? Subscribe today and join the conversation.